Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Practically Nothing podcast. Today I'm your host, Ordo, and I am joined today by Cardwiz and only Cardwiz.
Today I am here, and I am exclusively not in Japan this time,
Very nice, very nice.
unlike some of the games in the series we're about to mention.
Ah, so true. But maybe if Echoes does well, we can see more of those on the Switch.
That'd be the dream come true. Has there been any details on the Switch exclusive Fire Emblem game?
Nope, hasn't. There haven't been anything yet. I'm suspecting we may hear maybe some rumblings at E3, but for the most part, I expect them only to be talking about Fire Emblem Warriors.
Hmm. Spoiler alert, today's subject matter will be the game Fire Emblem.
Yep. We're 24 hours removed from actually recording our last episode, which was Star Wars. And on that one, Dr. Bodyguard mentioned that he would not be on this one because he's never played Fire Emblem series. He's not too interested. We've tried to get him interested, but we don't really think it's for him.
It's
But
his
with the
loss.
upcoming release of Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadow of Valencia, or is it Valentina?
I've been saying Valencia. I have no idea if it's right. Maybe if there's voice acting in the game, we will find out if we're pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, it's prob we'll just say SOV, or we'll just call it Echoes since it may be the only one. But today we just wanted to talk about our experiences with the Fire Emblem series. I mean, both of us are massive fans, and when it came to our very first episode on our top five list, I had Sacred Stones listed as my number five game, and Cardwiz has his listed as the as Fire Emblem as number one. So we figured, let's just sit down and have a talk about it.
Yeah, I would say that Fire Emblem is the game that not only inadvertently connected me to some of my best friends, it's what got me into hardcore sort of gaming. I'd always had like a Nintendo and a Game Boy and bunch of the systems as I grew up, but I didn't become a quote gamer until Fire Emblem came out, and I wanted to know every single aspect of that game. And the Fire Emblem I'm talking about is Fire Emblem 7, the first one that came out in America on the Game Boy Advance. And that's how I got started with this series. My little brother actually was the one who purchased the game. I have no idea why he purchased it. I didn't know he liked strategy games, and I still don't think he likes strategy games, but for some reason he bought it. I'm assuming based on the cover. But I just randomly started playing it one day and absolutely fell in love with the combat system, the characters, the artwork, just the entire game overall was to me at the time a perfect game, and it still is a near perfect game for me. And since then, I've played just about every Fire Emblem game that has been released in America, and I still love the series despite its up and downs.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird time for me. Like I had a Game Boy Advance in 2003. I think I may have had early one in 2002, but I didn't even touch the series until I want to say either I want to say probably 2007 with Sacred Stones because again kind of going back to the first episode again. I had mistaken this one for the first international release game, and I played through I've played Sacred Stones many times. It's definitely a lot easier than Fire Emblem Seven. But I think that Fire Emblem Seven is the much better game. It's got better music. Its mainline story is better, but I think the cast for Sacred Stones and their support conversations are a little bit better.
For that, it's coin flip. Both games have tremendous characters. But the thing is, what was something with Nintendo and with Fire Emblem, it's always been a little thorn in my side. It's mostly a minor annoyance more than anything. But 7 wasn't supposed to be the first Fire Emblem to come to America. I believe the first one was supposed to be number 6. I had the old Nintendo powers going back to when Melee came out. And I remember always looking at the release list. And in the game Smash Bros. Melee, there were these two characters, Marth and Roy. Marth was from this old Japanese series, some Fire Emblem. We'd never heard of it at the time. But Roy was going to be in this new Fire Emblem game, a game that was going to come over to America. I had the Nintendo powers that said it was coming to America, but it never came. It never came.
If you really want to be honest, Roy is like the biggest cock tease for Fire Emblem fans because we don't have a full game with him in it. He's always DLC. He's DLC. He's DLC in New Smash Brothers, Awakening, um, in Shadows. Excuse me, Echoes. He's an amiibo, like like a ghost amiibo summon, but even then, I guess you can call that kind of DLC. Um, and we really only have him in the mobile game, and even then, he's kind of hard to get because he's a 5-star unlockable.
And yet he's still one of the biggest faces of the franchise, and we've never played his game. We just saw this weird red-headed sword fighter with a blazing blade. When you charge up that B attack, let it hold that sword back as long as you could, and then slam it down, the explosion happening, blowing that stupid sandbag as far as you can knock it. I had so much fun with that thing. Roy was my, quote, main, if I had ever heard of mains back in the day for Melee, and I had so much fun with that.
I loved using Roy. I actually forgot that Roy actually appears in Fire Emblem 7 at the very end in the epilogue.
The epilogue that was only in the Japanese and the American versions. It was cut out of the European release because Nintendo remembered, oh yeah, we're not releasing Fire Emblem 6 to these plebs.
Yeah. I guess before we should continue, we'd probably say there are going to be spoilers for the Fire Emblem games.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want to say like huge. Well, you know what? No, because we might say it anyway. If from here on out, there's probably going to be spoilers for the internationally released Fire Emblem games.
Spoiler, the game Fire Emblem that has dragons on the cover tends to have a dragon for the final boss.
Except for Sacred Stones.
That was a something. I forget exactly what it was, but that was a something.
There's Draco zombies, and they're not bosses. They're tough, but they're not bosses. The final boss of that game is a demon lord named Formortis.
Yes. And that was if you failed to protect all the sacred stones, which of course you didn't because you failed. You're so bad at that job.
Yeah.
You had one job, Ephraim and Joshua and Erica and all of you, Rachel.
Joshua did nothing wrong. Joshua was the best.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, kind of going back to like Super Smash Brothers Melee, it was actually the decision to actually release a Fire Emblem game in the West came because Advanced Wars was doing really good, and Nintendo of America noticed that these characters were getting popular from Smash Brothers Melee, and people wanted to know more about them. So they decided, hey, let's go ahead and release this series. And the very first game released is Fire Emblem. It's just called Fire Emblem over here in the States for a time. But its full title was Fire Emblem Rekka no Ken, which I think it literally translates into like the Blazing Sword. And then once the mobile game came out, they officially started calling it the Blazing Blade. That was 2003 when that game first came out, and I don't actually know how it did sales-wise, but it was popular enough to actually spawn the Sacred Stones, Radiant Dawn, and everything else going forward. So it definitely had to have a huge impact riding off Melee.
It definitely had a fan base built onto it. I remember being on GameFAQs at the time, and on the Game Boy Advance screen for pretty much its entire life cycle, and maybe it still is today, I haven't checked in a while, the Fire Emblem was always in the top 10 message boards and top 10 FAQs, top 10 guides. That it was like that for years. And for a game like that that sort of came out of nowhere practically for most Americans, for it to be in the public consciousness for so long, that said something about the franchise, and thankfully Nintendo listened.
Well, I think it's because there's so many different ways to play it. I mean, yeah, you're going from point A to point B to point C and to the end, but there's different characters that you can use, and they have growth rates. And sometimes, like a character that you really like may get growth rate screwed, and their stats turn out horrible, and so you may not use them. But maybe this one run, the character that's always been bad will be good for you. And so then you pursue that character's what's called the support conversations. Will let you know more about that character and their story. Like every character in this game has what's called a support conversation. And those support conversations will give you better insight into their character, their past. And some of these characters are actually related to the main story and will give you better like understanding of what happens. Like he's a character that shows up at the end of the game. He's a priest.
Renault.
Yes, Renault. And you know about more about him than I do because you've played that game for so long that you have most of his supports. And yeah, he's showing me the cartridge. I only have it on the Wii U's digital whatchamacallit.
I I've got the game in my DS. When I had a Game Boy Advance SP, it stayed in my SP pretty much the entire time until I got Sacred Stones, but then I eventually switched back to it. I love this game more than pretty much any other game in the world. And one thing we haven't done, in case you have no idea what Fire Emblem is. Fire Emblem is you are playing the role of either the tactician of an army or the lord of an army. Who it is your army has the goal to, of course, defeat the big bad, however the story plays out. But with this army, instead of commanding a bunch of faceless units or infinite respawn people like in Advance Wars, which is an awesome game, you control approximately 30 to 40 or so characters in each different game. Each of these characters does have a unique personality, which if you do these support conversations, you can find so many different layers to them. In the good Fire Emblem, in the well-written Fire Emblem games, they will be incredibly deep and three-dimensional characters who have all sorts of cares, worries, and fears and loves in the world. That's what I loved about that game. You were controlling an army of friends, in a sense. Exploring the world. It was an amazing experience that I still look back on fondly.
And not everyone's actual overall character goal is to save the world, which is really something interesting about Fire Emblem, the Blazing Sword. So there's this character named Raven, and basically his whole character story is about how his noble house got taken down because of a scandal. So for this, he wants revenge against one of the main characters, Hector. And so his supports with his sister and the person who is his retainer are all about this. And it like builds this small world around him. And I think in the end, he and Hector, I think in one of his endings, because some of the characters, depending on their support conversations, may have different endings with one another. And his ending with Lucius, which is the person I mentioned that is his retainer, will actually, talk him down from wanting to kill Hector, and then him and Hector get together and discover that, oh, your house was taken down wrongly. And I don't know if his house gets restored or whatever, but still, it's still a very cool thing to see like how these different facets of characters come together.
It is a deep world, and not all of them are great people. Some of them you can have just assassins join you. You can have mercenaries who only care about money, aka Farina. Pay her that 20,000 gold, which is most of your budget in that game. A lot of great characters, and all of them have multiple dimensions to them. Some of them more than others. Some of them, in some games, you will come across as one dimension, and we might get to that a little bit later on. But it's a bunch of different people. They feel like people that you are controlling, these little digital sprites as they move across the field. Yet when that 2% critical lightning bolt hits them, you feel it. Not just normal rage at RNG or at the enemy sprite. It's you feel bad because you let your friend die. As incredibly sort of over the top as that sounds, that's how I felt with that game and with these games as they continue. I will not, when someone dies, I will restart the chapter every single time. Not because, oh, I have to get a perfect run. No, it's just like, I don't want this guy to die.
Yeah, because you put, a lot of time and investment. And what we're talking about is called permadeath. So if a unit dies, up until the 12th game, before they made casual an option, if you lost a character, that was it. They're dead. They're not coming back. The only exception, I think, is Fire Emblem 11, which is a remake of the first game. You can eventually, it's a one-time use item. You can actually go to the shrine on the map, and you can revive, one character. But other than that, they're dead for good. You will never see them again. You will never see their story. And then when it's showing everyone's endings at the end of the credits, it'll say, oh, Joshua died at chapter whatever it is they actually died at. And again, it kind of goes back to that, oh, I let this person down. I feel bad. Especially if you're learning about them through support conversations.
Mm-hmm. And those Game Boy Advance games, I felt did the best job with that. But the Game Boy Advance games, while in my opinion they're the best, there were still a lot of great ones to follow, including the next game, which came out on the Nintendo GameCube, called Path of Radiance. You follow a mercenary group led by Ike, who is the son of he's the son of the person who founded the mercenary group, as he adventures to help save the kingdom. And it is, once again, that game probably has the best story and some of the best characters. The problems I have with that game is that it's the first one that introduces skills and a lot of passives that can really overwhelm you a little bit. It adds a little bit more complexity to the game, which some people say was needed. I could live with or without it, but that game added a lot to the Fire Emblem franchise, including a lot of great characters. Sadly, the downsides of that game is it's a Nintendo GameCube game, but it kind of looks like an N64 game, sadly. They put all the budget into the sprites, which, hey, I'm not going to complain about the 2D hand-drawn sprites, which are beautiful.
This game came out in 2005 and actually was the first Fire Emblem game to be on a console since 1999's Fire Emblem Thracia 776, which didn't do that well because it was a Super Nintendo game being released on a dead console in 1999. I really don't get why Thracia ever came out. Because even the N64 was going out by 1999, and we were about to make way for the GameCube pretty soon.
They were just so far into development. I have to guess. I don't know all the details on it. There are YouTube channels which have done a lot of research into Fire Emblem who might have the exact reasons for it, but I do not know off the top of my head why they would ever do that when it set that up for failure.
Yeah. But Path of Radiance is really known. I've only played through Path of Radiance once because it was not a game that was readily available for me from where I lived. So I ended up renting this game probably twice, and I made my way through a good portion of this game when I was still a Fire Emblem scrub. I really didn't know too much about the series. And then I borrowed it from a friend way, way, way down the road later and beat the final chapter. And I was just like, oh, that's what happens. That's pretty cool. Path of Radiance, apparently it's a really easy game that if you tried, I don't even want to say if you tried hard enough, it's actually built to where you could actually solo the entire game with Ike alone.
Ike is incredibly overpowered, and it's fantastic. That was one of the first instances of a weapon being introduced that didn't have any durability to it, with the Ragnall, if I remember correctly.
Yes. If you want to know what the Ragnall blade is, it's the sword you always see Ike with in Smash Brothers, that gold sword. It is broken. It is broken because it can hit you at 1-on-1 range, and then it can also hit you on 1-2 with a sword beam. And then it has the Aether skill, which does it double your attack and heal you? Or is it...
Is that the one that you can attack 5 times? Or
No, that's the Brave Sword. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I think it's... Oh, I know it is. Aether is a combination of the skills Soul and Luna. So Ike can heal himself by activating it, and I think Luna does something to the defense. I think it ignores it or something.
That game is so much fun. I still have my copy of the GameCube game, and I have a really old Nintendo Wii that can still play it. And I need to go back to it again. It is such a really good strategy game with an amazing story, and once again, great characters who I want to see carry through on their mission.
The story itself introduces, which it's sort of a dual thing where at the very start of it, Ike's father is killed, and he ends up going through the ranks to become the leader of the army that ends up saving the entire world. And then you have Alencia, who's the princess of the nation. Her parents are killed, and her existence is pretty much non-existent, or it's not known for many of Crimea's people, the land you're trying to save. So Ike and Alencia together, both rookies and don't really know what they're doing, rise up together to take back this kingdom. It's very endearing. And then the other part of that story is racism, or discrimination, however you want to look at it, because there's people in this game that are like beast people called Lagoos, and they can transform into different
Subhumans.
things.
The dirty subhumans.
Easy there, Shinon.
Ugh.
But
He's my favorite archer.
Shinon's great. I mean, I'm a Virian hype beast till the end, but Shinon's great. He's kind of an asshole, but he's great.
He absolutely is. He's a horrible human being, but he wears it on his sleeve and it is fantastic. Just another example. All the characters are not just straight up goody goods trying to save the world. He's kind of a prejudiced jerk, but he eventually tries to improve himself a little bit, and he's a great character.
Yeah,
He has great relationships with Rolf, which is one of my favorite supports in all of the games. Just him sort of secretly being this mentor to this young boy who doesn't have a father figure. I love it. I love these games so much.
the one of the good things about this game is this is the first game where you start kind of seeing the support type deals, where your supports come into play. Um, because some of the support stuff that you get from this game carry over and affect stuff in, unfortunately, the next game. Um, I can't think of all the things, but I know one of them is like if you get an A support, which in these games, the GBA games are as high as you can get. You get A support for Ike and Soren, and then you get an A support for Ike and Soren in the next game, Radiant Dawn. They'll unlock a secret ending for them. And I think there's other supports that you unlock in Path of Radiance that carry over into Radiant Dawn that upon playing maybe the second time around through, you'll unlock additional story stuff that'll give better context to things.
I do not have any information to follow up on that. I played Radiant Dawn, or I tried to. I probably got about three-quarters of the way through that game, but I did not like it almost at all. The strategy to it was still okay. It was still solid, but they did a huge, massive, massive misstep with the franchise in that game, in that the supports now really didn't mean anything. The supports became just generic things. Like if you and I were in the game and we got to see supports together, it'd be like, "Hey, good job, buddy," and you would
Thank you.
say,
Be safe out there. And that's
"Thanks,
it.
pal."
That's
And
it.
yeah, that was all of these supports. All of these characters who were supposed to be deep and complex and have relationships with each other and the world, all of a sudden just became faceless army men. Faceless armament. It was no longer the game series that I loved. It still had like the outside skits, which were introduced in Path of Radiance, but that did not feel like enough for me.
It wasn't, because here's the problem. In between Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, there's a 3-year time skip. What were these characters doing in the 3 years? You don't
Uh,
know. You don't know. Like, Ike comes back and he's bigger. He is buffer, and holy crap. And it's just
so
like, what if Grail, because the Grail mercenaries are missing for like for the first, because there's part 1, part 2, part 3. Grail mercenaries show back up, I think, midway through part 3, and they take over as the main characters for part 4. And it's just like, okay, they were missing all this time. No one could find them. What were they doing? This is the part where you would probably go to something like support conversation and say, oh, well, this is where I can figure out what's been happening. But because they gutted the support conversations and only gave you the stat bonuses from putting people together with the generic whatevers, you don't figure out anything. And it loses a lot because of that.
that it was just an incredibly disappointing game that I really wish I liked, but I do not. I can honestly say the same thing for very similar reasons about the next game that came to America, Shadow Dragon, which was a DS remake of the very first Fire Emblem game. And it had not only did it have the problem with the support system in that there really wasn't one, it also had, in my opinion, the ugliest art style that the franchise ever had. Uglier than like the NES sprites that they had. It looks like an ugly sort of almost claymation-ish, really poor looking early 3D rendering of the characters for portraits instead of like the hand-drawn looking portraits that we'd had since the GBA days. We had just these just off-putting looking characters who I did not get a chance to know and didn't want a chance to know after like 10 chapters.
Well, yeah, that's one of the big things. Now, I've actually recently played this because I was just like, I want to play this game and figure out what the deal is, and it's only $10, so I picked it up on the Wii U's Virtual Console, and there's almost, I mean, I understand that this is a remake of a NES game, but they could have expanded upon it. Support conversations, add them. Tell me why I need to care about Princess Nina, Nina, whatever the blonde
I don't
princess's
know their
name is.
names. I don't know anyone's name outside of Marth in that game.
Yeah, well, because it's just like the only character to have any sort of like development in that game is Kane, and his development comes when he or if you accidentally get him killed. He talks about I didn't want to let the people who I fought for down. I didn't want to let my prince down. And, that's about as much character support you get for any character in that game. And going back to Princess Nina or whatever her name is, chapter I want to say 23. She makes a big fuss, and she's about, one of the guys you're about to face who is Camus. She's like, oh, this guy, he showed me a kindness one time. And she kind of hints at, maybe that Camus wasn't evil. Maybe he wasn't a bad guy. But I don't know that. Even in the battle conversation with him, it's just like, okay, I've got to kill you. And support conversations could have added a whole new depth and dynamic to that. Imagine her talking about this guy like he was the greatest thing in the world. Then, showing up on the battlefield and being like, no, you're on their side. Come to my side. Nothing happens like that. And it's especially bad when the game gives you like it's early on. You meet a character named Ogma, and he's a mercenary. So you get Ogma, Barst, Board, and Cord. See? I know the names.
Ah, see what they did there.
But you get all four of these characters, and they're just like, well, Ogma's just like, yeah, I'm a mercenary. But Board, Cord, Barst, I know nothing about them. I bench all of them except Barst because Barst is some kind of axe god in that game, and he just tore through everything.
Something I just now realized. The characters from that first Fire Emblem game, the game where they might have gotten the most character development was the game where they were kind of side characters with amnesia in Tokyo Mirage Sessions on the Wii U. I feel like I learned more about Kane, Marth, and Celica. Was that her name?
Oh, you're thinking of Sheeta.
Sheeta. Yes,
Or,
I
or
learned.
some places, because it's spelled differently, they say Kata, but I think
Yeah.
it's supposed to be Sheeta.
I felt like I learned more and was attached to those characters more from that RPG where they were amnesiacs from another dimension than from the actual games they were from. That is probably not a great thing.
No, not at all. I mean, even like when you get them in Fire, well, let's go back to what we were talking about before when we were talking about Fire Emblem 7, and we were like, you learn about these characters, and when you die, you feel bad. I lost probably like 12 or 13 people in Shadow Dragon. I was just like, you're dead. Okay. Because there's this one thing. Later on in the game, you go to this village, and the village is like, oh man, if you go to this village, you're going to you don't want to talk to these people because they're going to be mad at you. But if you talk to these people, the other village is going to be mad at you. And what happens is like you either have a choice between a unit named Samuel and a unit named Iran. So I went to this village, and Iran was there. And then you get Iran, and like it's just like, oh, the other village has closed its doors to you. It's like, what are they fighting about? Support conversations with either Samuel or Iran could have been like, oh, this is what the whole deal with that is. And that could have not really maybe tied into the main story, but it could have been like that thing with Raven that we mentioned earlier, where it was just a mini story that world builds. But you don't have that.
No. Instead, we get a bunch of. I wish they were faceless by the way they looked, but not faceless units, and that's all they are to me in that game. They're just units to be moved across the board, just chess pieces. And I will sacrifice my pawns, and I don't like looking at this franchise that way because that's not what the franchise feels like it should be.
Even characters like who are directly related, Minerva, Maria, and Michaelis or Michaelis. I don't know how you're supposed to say his name. they're all related, but they have really no conversations. And they show up. I mean, I like Minerva. She's definitely like a kick-ass strong female, but her story beats are very limited. So she approaches Marth early on in the game, and she mentions that her homeland, which is Macedonia, she's like, my brother's doing wicked things in Macedonia, and my sister's caught up in it. And her sister's a kid, but she's like still a cleric, so she can heal you and whatever. And then when you go onto that map, it's not even Minerva that recruits Maria, from what I remember. And then they have maybe one after battle conversation, and that's it. With a support conversation, they could have had a much stronger bond. And then go on to, because you don't go to Macedonia until almost the end of the game. And I don't even think Minerva has pre-battle quotes for Michaelis. And again, I'm not giving any context for what's happening. Now I hear that some of this stuff is fixed in the next game, which is Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, which is a remake of the third game, which the third game is both a remake and a sequel to the first game, if that makes sense. And I heard it adds some support-like stuff with it, but I've never played it because it doesn't have an official English translation, because Shadow Dragon and Radiant Dawn sold so horribly.
Yeah, what was that, like a 10-minute conversation about Shadow Dragon? I feel like that's the most anyone has ever talked about Shadow Dragon in America. Yeah, all I know is that a sequel came out, it never got here, and we almost never got another Fire Emblem again. But thankfully, we did. We got one a couple of years later, and it reinvigorated the franchise. It opened up an entirely new fan base who had never played it before, and even the old vets from the Game Boy Advance days like us went back to it and enjoyed it quite a bit. And that game was Fire Emblem Awakening.
Basically after Radiant Dawn failed and Shadow Dragon had sold extremely poorly, they were just like, well, I guess I don't know how New Mystery of the Emblem did, but between those two games, Nintendo was just like, you guys got one more game, and we're closing it up for the franchise unless it sells 250,000 copies total. And so they were like, well, okay, let's throw all the stuff against the wall. So they added a second gen, like Genealogy of the Holy War. Support conversations were back, thank God. Mm-hmm. It was 3D, much like Radiant Dawn was, because we're actually on the 3DS now. Trying to think of other features that it had Street Pass. You could summon old characters. There's a lot of stuff in this game, which you really think about it.
It had the biggest feature, which probably made it more popular than ever, and that is the waifu feature of the ability to marry off just about any character to anyone and let them have children, including your avatar character that you put into the game yourself. And while this was a good feature, a good idea, there were problems with it that I would say, in my opinion, the biggest problem with it is that because of all the children it created, like there was time travel in this game where you can have kids and they would come to fight on your side against the big bad evil. Because of all the pairings and because of all the different parent combinations, it made it so that the kids all felt a little bit generic. And that means like about half of your cast feels a little too generic and a little two-dimensional, sadly. Well, I love that game. I love that game. It brought Fire Emblem back to the Game Boy Advance days of having good maps, decent characters, great artwork. But the characters felt more two-dimensional than they had before. I don't know if that was the translation team or if it was the original Japanese that had it that way, but the characters in that game felt more tropey. But I still love that game a lot and put probably over 100 hours into it. I complain because I love that game and wish it was as much as which it was as good as Fire Emblem 7 was, in my opinion.
I've recently played through this game. Um, it's still a fun game, and I think it is a good entry point for new players because it introduces. Well, I don't want to say introduces because the game that did not come over here to the U.S. also had this feature, but it's casual mode. And what casual mode is that you can turn permadeath off. So if you lose a unit, they'll come back, you know, at the end of the map. So you don't lose them for good. Which again, Awakening's sort of an easy game. So again, I'm a veteran, so it could just be me, but it's somewhat easy. So you probably shouldn't be losing units that bad. But sometimes you always make that one mistake, or you get ambush spawn on the tree level.
It's a fun game, and that is a good feature. I am glad that feature was added. It makes the game more, what's I guess the word would be, inclusive to people. Why not make the game more inclusive? I don't mind games having an easy mode, so long as they don't take away the normal stuff. Please go on, keep adding these features, especially if you're going to make them an optional feature. Please add as much as you want to the game.
Yeah. The game overall was a million seller. And it was only it would keep in now think about they expected to sell less than 250,000, close the book on the Fire Emblem forever, and never see it again.
I
And
might
it
have been
sold
responsible
that
for
much.
3 of those purchases.
hmm The funny thing about this is I remember like I didn't really hear too much about this game because I had a 3DS, but I wasn't. I got it at the price drop price, um, and then at the time there was a website or it may have been a blog called Joystick, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Fire Emblem Sacred Stone's Erica joins the cast of Fire Emblem Awakening." I was like, "Are you what?" Now, Fire Emblem the Sacred Stone is my favorite game, so I looked this up, and the artwork for Erica in that game, she's wearing this beautiful bride's dress. It's probably one of the most beautiful like artworks I've ever seen. And I was like, well, I have to find out more about this game. So I was just like, okay, it's a game. It's coming to America. I'll wait to hear a little bit more on it. And then that year for E3, they had an exclusive 3DS showcase where they're going to show off 3DS games. And they did not show that game off. And they said that they forgot to show it off. They forgot to show off Fire Emblem. I was so mad because I really wanted to see a lot about the game. But it's a fun game.
It is a fun game, has its flaws, but it is still a great game. And if you've never played a Fire Emblem game, that's probably the best way to enter at this point.
They have a new 3DS X, or excuse me, a 2DS XL, which can play this game for 150 bucks. If you can find Fire Emblem Awakening on the cheap, I recommend it as a must-have game for your system. Quote me on it. For any
Mm-hmm.
criticisms that I may have for it, I still think it is a must-have game for your 3DS library.
Now, having said that, would you say that is a must own? Would you say that the next game in the series is a must own? Fire Emblem Fates, Conquest, Revelations, and Birthright.
Hmm.
3 games in one. And you
That
get to pay for every single one of them.
that one, it's a very hard sell, I want to say. I like Fire Emblem Well, let me be honest here. I like Fire Emblem Conquest for its gameplay. I like Fire Emblem Conquest for some of the backstories from the characters like Kaze and Jacob and the maids. But overall, your self-insert character this time, named Corrin, is 100% the worst Fire Emblem main he is in. He/she is completely insufferable, and I cannot stand them.
But you're a dragonborn or something, and yet you got to save the world.
Everyone just I don't want to like rant on the Fire Emblem Fates saga, but it has so many of these story bits. We have rival ninja clans. We have um, like an Earth tribe, a Wind tribe. We've got a princess who is also kidnapped in this story, and she has her own story about a land below the other two, which with its own thing, with its own conflict and its own dragon, and it's just like there's all these different important story beats, but none of them mixed together in a coherent fashion. So to answer that question, is this a must-have? Hmm. I it I don't want to say it is a must-have, but I think it is worth checking out if you can find it on the cheap. If you can find Fire Emblem Conquest for $20, give it a look.
I would say go with Birthright. Hoshido is the one true family.
Yeah, no, we're gonna fight. Actually, actually, if you started with Awakening and you're used to that kind of play style, and you go with what I just said of just checking it out for maybe on the cheap, then go with Birthright because Birthright's gonna be more of that. But if you came from like the GBA games, you want to follow my suggestion, go on the cheap, then go Birthright because Birthright has more varied like you seize a castle, you root an enemy, you have to escape in X amount of turns. It gives you more diversified playstyle options.
Uh, I really wish I liked Fates, but I don't. I got to like chapter 22 of Birthright and stopped and never picked it up again. Uh, it just felt like they were trying to recreate the sort of magic of Awakening, including the having kids thing. But this time, instead of time travel, you have pocket dimensions where you just throw the kids and then you just sort of you pick them up 18 years later somehow because we want to do the kids thing again. It felt that one thing felt so incredibly forced. It actually really turned me off of the game because it just felt like we're recreating Awakening. We are doing the same thing that we did in Awakening, and we're going to force it in no matter how weird it is. Because in Awakening, as weird as it was, it made sense to have time travel of all things.
Basically, here's how it goes down in Awakening. In Fire Emblem Awakening, your your self-insert character for this game named Robin, and it can be male or female, betrays Crom because he/she ends up getting possessed by their own like there's like a dragon entity, and their body is like the perfect host for it. So the host takes over and kills Crom, who is like the main lord for that game. What happens from then on is that the world literally just goes to hell. And the kids of the first generation have been fighting this for so long. Eventually, they get a chance to come back into the past to warn the present Crom about all the stuff that's going to go down. So, support conversation wise, I mentioned like a little bit before how in certain games you can only go to A. In these games, your characters can marry off once they hit an S support. This will like activate a map and you can go rescue that kid. And the kid's like, yo, I came from the future. Here's the ring proving that you're my parents. And that's how that goes down. In Fates, you get an S support with someone, and it's just like, oh yeah, but the war is so bad, so we put them in this pocket dimension so that where they could grow up, and then we come and get them later. But then the problem with that is like some kids are the exact same age as the parents. Some kids are actually older than their parents, and they don't really do anything for the story until a DLC called Heirs of Fate, which is actually good. I'll actually give the Heirs of Fate maybe a recommendation.
The DLC makes pocket dimensions make sense.
Yeah, which is the thing. I mean, to be honest, in Awakening, with my latest run through, I just wanted to see if I could go through without getting kids at all. And you really don't need the kids, but some of the things that they do give you context for their story. And Awakening has a DLC called the Future Past, which puts more emphasis on the children characters and actually gives them unique support conversations with their fathers. Awakening doesn't, or I'm sorry, Fates doesn't do that though. They just kind of feel like, oh, let's do the shipping thing again. And you can tell by the way the story is, they wasted so much on that. So many resources, so many assets, so many like writing things. Apparently, like the development team was actually split on this.
Well, it seems to be split with at least some people not liking it that way because apparently I haven't read all the details. Shadows of Valencia, Fire Emblem Echoes does not seem to have that. It seems to go back to the old school Fire Emblem of collect the army and go fight the big bad, and they're with the army being split into two, much like in Sacred Stones.
Yeah, Sacred Stones takes a lot of story beats from because we're mentioning Fire Emblem Shadows of Valencia. That game is actually a remake of the second game in the series, which is actually a black sheep, Fire Emblem Gaiden. And so Of course, that game doesn't have a second gen or children or anything like that. So, but they are adding support conversations to this remake.
Mhm. That game is coming out pretty darn soon, and it's probably going to be a day one purchase for me. It reminds me of the Game Boy Advance games, and it even has like an open world ish that you can dungeon crawl through in sections, and I am really intrigued to see how that works, or if it'll get old the first time I do it. But it's a game I am incredibly looking forward to. Maybe I'll be disappointed like I was with Fates, but here's hoping we got another great game on our hands.
I think it will be. It looks like it's shaping up because, I mean, the story's already there. They're just refining a lot of details of it. I,
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of like there's anything else about like Fates I would really want to complain about.
Uh,
I'm still trying to think of what you said about it just being like a must-have. I'm just
you can go explore castles, or your friend's castle, where you can pick up some topaz and a rutabaga.
yeah. I will at least say if you want to buy it, listen to the soundtrack. Godlike.
True.
Both it and Awakening. There, but then again, there's no Fire Emblem game that has a bad soundtrack. So
Yeah. And if you're not into that sort of style of classical instrumentals, I disagree with you, but check out the soundtrack for the Fire Emblem cross Shin Megami Tensei
to
Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
yeah, that's it.
That has an amazing sort of Japanese pop soundtrack. It has that entire game is themed around Japanese idols, but it's still so good that I still wanted to play that game, and I did play that game. I loved it. Some great dungeon crawling, a fantastic battle system where you link attacks with each other based on elemental weaknesses, pretty much basing itself off of the Shin Megami Tensei battle system, mixed up with the Fire Emblem system with the weapons triangle. And that is a highly underrated game that it's going to be completely overlooked in history because it was on late game Wii U. So
Well, there's also the fact of how they promoted that game. They showed when they announced it, like, look, here's all the Shin Megami Tensei characters. Here's all the Fire Emblem characters. And these two studios, they're coming together to make this ultimate game. And then when we saw it, it was Japanese pop idols. This game didn't even do well in Japan. It actually did better here than it did in Japan.
it is a completely overlooked game, and I get why it's incredibly off-putting. Like, if I was not a big fan of the Persona series, which is another offshoot of Shin Megami Tensei, and Fire Emblem, I would not have picked up this game. If I was not a fan of both of those, I would not have picked up the game. But I'm glad I am, and I'm glad I did, because it was one of the best games on the Wii U, and hopefully it gets a Switch remake, because it seems like a bunch of things are getting Switch remakes from the Wii U, because no one played the Wii U.
Yeah, which is sad. It really is a good game, and it definitely gets. Typically, I don't say, "Oh, well, this game's underrated. That game's underrated." But this game really is a criminally underrated game because it plays well. It's got good dungeons. It's got interesting themes. And I can't say good stuff about it. I've only played through it once because it's like a 60-hour RPG.
Same. It's a long RPG. I don't think it has replay value, but it is still 60 hours that I'm glad I spent.
Yeah, it's got. It's just a good game. How else can you put it?
Mhm. And it makes you're playing as someone who's becoming an idol, and it works, or you're becoming a manager of the idol. But that's probably the one complaint I'd have about that game. Have more idol stuff. Weirdly enough, build
Yeah.
that up, because you'd occasionally just get a weird cutscene. I'd rather it be kind of like Persona, just like build up quote social links. Build up. I'd rather like to build up idle links to
Well,
try to
you
be
kind
on
of
this
do
weird
that.
journey. You kind of do that with your teammates. You have like 3 missions with each of your teammates,
And that's like
and
your
those were the
CBA
best.
sports.
Those were the best part of the games. Like, I probably worded this incorrectly. What I wanted is for your main character to actually be more involved in the world, because he was just kind of there on the side.
Yeah.
Like, everyone told you how important your character was, but he was just kind of there. One of those situations. It's just a protagonist problem.
Yeah.
They have a lot of games. It's not a unique problem.
Other than his best friend Subasa, he did kind of just feel like he was there. Like, oh yeah, you're doing the thing. Yeah, well, I believe in you. You can do it. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, thanks, protagonist. I did do it because of you.
Uh, Even the offshoots of Fire Emblem were fun. I'm trying to think if there are any other offshoots that are worth mentioning.
Super Smash Brothers for the Wii U.
Uh,
Actually, you know what?
no,
Let me go ahead and say something here.
go for it.
I dislike when people are like, there's too many Fire Emblem games, Fire Emblem characters in this game. There's 6 characters." It's just like, dude, there are 9 Mario characters. There are 9 Mario characters, like 5 Zelda characters, 5 Pokemon characters, and I do hate because this series has been around since 1990, and it's a much bigger franchise in Japan than it is here. And I feel like it, in fact, does get its due by having this many characters in the game.
And not they're not all clubs. Like even in Melee, like if the only difference was the fire and the piercing between Marth and Roy, but that was still enough of a difference that made them feel like they played differently.
Yeah,
We had the same thing when Ike was in Brawl with his sort of more brutish swordplay style.
Ike is nothing like Marth, but you still have people like, oh, he's just another Fire Emblem clone. It's just like, you don't even play the character.
You're just
Ike
you're
and Marth,
prejudiced against blue hair people.
yeah, I mean, Ike and Marth play completely different.
Then you got
Lucina and Marth are clones. Roy is a what's called a Luigified clone. Ike doesn't play like him. Robin doesn't play like any of them because he has
oh,
magic, and Corrin does not play like any of them.
how does Corrin play? I've never played Corrin. Never got the DLC.
Um, Corrin is actually a pretty good character. The only time you'll hear me say Corrin pretty good in character in a sentence, but they have they can transform into a dragon for counterattacks. Their side B like makes their arm form into like you know like the dragon stab thing they use in the
Yes, that
game.
you'd get on the crits.
Yeah, that's their side B, and you can actually use that to like stab into the stage itself, and then you can launch yourself left and right with a kick. Um,
Oh, fantastic.
your I think it's your back air will actually like open the dragon wings up and like let you like kind of float up like just a tiny bit. You can't do it like in succession like Kirby or anything. Um, the up B, I think it's some kind of water attack. I don't know. It's actually been a while since I played Smash Brothers and Corrin in general.
There, before we wrap this up, there is another Fire Emblem game that I forgot to mention. The most recent Fire Emblem game, actually, Fire Emblem Heroes for the mobile devices.
Yeah.
It is a free-to-play game from Nintendo with a Fire Emblem theme. It has a lot of pay to win, sort not pay to win, but pay to get characters, and it's a good free game. It is a good free game. I played it for about 2 months, but that's about how long a decent free game will last for me because I'm not going to put a cent into those games because there's not really a story.
Yeah. I'm still playing it off and on. Like if a thing comes up, I'm like, oh yeah, there's new character. Let me play to get the orbs so I can summon new characters. And if I get something, yeah. If I don't, eh. But it's you can actually consider that maybe like a Fire Emblem sampler pack. Maybe you'll see a character and think, man, I want to know about this character, and you can actually in the settings menu pull up the hero merit. I think it's called the hero merit, and you can tap on the screen. And it'll say, oh, well, this character serves uh, like you'll say, oh, well, this is Kagero. She's a retainer for Lord Ryoma, and she appears in Fire Emblem Fates. And you're like, oh, well, let me check out this Fire Emblem Fates game. Oh, okay, well, that's the character, and like, it's essentially kind of like a Fire Emblem sampler pack where you can say, I like this character and this character. Well, let me try out their game.
And for a free mobile game, it's pretty successful. The battle system is very, 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 very simple, but it showcases the weapon triangles and the magic triangles and how that works out. It's a good idea. If you don't want to get into Fire Emblem via the 3DS games or the GBA games, try out Fire Emblem Heroes on your iPhone or your Android device. It's a free, solid introduction that teaches you the very, very, very bare bone basics of the series.
Fire Emblem. We could probably go on for probably another 6 hours talk about Fire Emblem.
Oh, I love that game. Let's talk about Dorcas.
What happened to Dorcas?
He is an amazing character and a good husband. He tries so hard.
I think He can actually kill his wife if you leave her open, though.
Hmm.
I'm
So
here to save my wife.
he doesn't recognize her because she's a green unit.
Oh, green unit's the worst. Actually, shout out to 313 Archer in Path of, or in Radiant Dawn. The god. He gets on that ballista and he's just killing everything. He gets off the ballista, he's killing everything as long as you keep him healed.
Mm. Shout out to random axe user I kidnapped in Fire Emblem Fates because Rinka is an awful axe unit.
Rinka is an awful everything.
Yeah. That was one thing I was really disappointed with Fates. Not to get back to Fates, but it had a lot of cool things. It had the clubs, it had with the tribes, it had the clubs, it had the paper magic, it had the ninjas, like all sorts of units that we'd never seen before in Fire Emblem. But those were probably the only good things about that. Well, only good new things about that game.
On the flip side, for me who played on Conquest, Arthur's a bad axe unit.
That game just hates axe units.
Unless your name is Charlotte. Make her a berserker and nothing is killing her. Nothing. Except, well, magic, because she's a fighter, so she'll have low resistance. But man, crits all day.
Now we're getting into the way too nitty gritty details of the series.
Yes.
People have already tuned out now.
Probably.
This was a good talk. I'm glad we got the chance to the two of us to sit down and talk Fire Emblem and nerd out for a while.
Yeah, we'll probably do this again. Probably a more focused one on, probably. I don't want to say. I'm not going to put a date on it. I'm not going to say anything, but we'll probably talk a little bit more about Shadows of Valentia that's going to be coming out. At the time of this, it's about a week before it comes out.
Yeah. If we don't do a whole episode on it, we'll definitely have a long segment on it.
Or we'll even have like dedicated episodes maybe to the different games. Because I know we could probably talk about one game just like forever.
Mm-hmm.
That would be interesting.
Oh, that would be fun.
You know what? Game Informer does this thing called the Game Club, where they tell their listeners, they're like, okay, listeners, we're going to be playing this game from this part to this part, and then then on their next podcast, they actually talk about like their experiences and they answer questions and like do comparisons with people. So maybe you and I could do something like that with the original game.
We could do something like that. We are going to end up talking about it Fire Emblem anyway when we're on Xbox or something.
Yeah.
One last thing that I really want to mention before we sign off. Again, sorry to extend it.
Yeah.
Something that reinvigorated my love for the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems in particular that happened within the last year. These games that I probably put almost 1,000 hours into got reinvigorated. Makes me want to put another 1,000 into the discovery of the Fire Emblem randomizer.
Oh yes.
I discovered it through you, and I believe you discovered it through a Fire Emblem YouTuber named Mangs, Mangs, I believe, who has randomized Fire Emblem series and Pick My Edit series, which are all fantastic and fun to watch, and I'd recommend it if you're kind of into Fire Emblem. He's a good YouTuber to check out, and the randomizer just randomizes your units. What randomizes the class, what order you get them in, and it is just so off the wall. You can get put in impossible situations very frequently, but trying to overcome them in different ways than you ever would have played the game before is so much fun. I put so many hours into that on my computer.
Yeah. So basically, like what a randomizer does. So let's say you have Hector. Hector is an axe unit, will always be an axe unit. A randomizer can turn Hector, an axe unit, into a mage unit. And that's just like one example. He can end up being a sword fighter or a lord or anything. I think another YouTuber by the name of Gast, his low end got turned into the dragon. And basically the dragon sprite is only the floating head because the body is actually part of like the background. So he just had this floating dragon low end going everywhere. But yeah, you can definitely look those up on your own. They're definitely fun, and they definitely will extend your enjoyment of these games. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
I feel like that about wraps it up. I think we did a good job of covering just all the games we've had experiences with.
Actually, actually, you and I talked about this before we actually started recording, but we mentioned the YouTubers Mangs and Gast. definitely look up Mangs' YouTube channel and look up his Fire Emblem character spotlights, because that's how I first discovered him. Basically, he does like one video and it focuses on a particular character. A lot of times they're like characters that are suggested to him, or I think some like recently he started doing things for Patreon users, for his Patreon users, and he goes in depth about the actual character, what they're like, their stats, their usability, and it's usually between, for the most part, like 5 and 12 minutes. But he does have a couple of them for like the Fire Emblem 4 characters that go on to the upwards of 30 minutes. But it's still good. And then Gast, he's another YouTuber that does something similar, but he has what's called support science, and he breaks down the support conversations for several characters in the series. And the length on his ranges from about 12 minutes to maybe two 30-minute videos for some characters, depending on, how good or bad they are.
Just goes to show like how deep some of these characters can be and why we love them. That
Yeah.
the fact that there can be these series on them, and it is just a totally viable thing, and there can be like 100 episodes of each of those series.
Yeah. And before we go again, let me just mention
We can't sign off.
never.
This is the podcast that never ends.
It's the longest sign off in history. But I guess that's where we cut it from here. This is the part where we do the plugs. Say where you can reach us, where you can find us. You can find us at Prac Podcast, PracPodcast. You can find you can find me personally at Plan Ordo. Those are both Twitter. Or if you want to email us, hit us up at practicallynothingpodcast@gmail.com. And for you, Mr. Cardwiz?
You can find me on Twitter at KD Corley, Corley, on Twitter, and that's pretty much all I got to plug right now.
What about your play?
My play? Well, I plugged it 24 hours ago, but I'll plug it again 24 hours later. I am in a production of Rock of Ages, so if you happen to be in Mobile, Alabama from June the 2nd to the 18th, you can come check it out any Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. It is a fun show. We just did the first act today, and it is a doozy.
Yeah, so definitely hit us up. Tell us about your Fire Emblem experiences. Tell us about your favorite characters, your favorite units. This is a series that's very dear to me and Cardwiz. Not so much to Bodyguard or Sled, who still hasn't been here for reasons. Yeah, definitely hit us up, and we will see you guys way later.
Bye-bye.